Architect Rem Koolhaas is here. The distinguished architectural critic of the New York Times, Herbert Mouchon, has called him, quote, perhaps the most influential architect of his generation. Frank Gehry says he is capable of challenging everything. He's one of the great thinkers of our time. Not only a designer, he is equally known for his writing. In fact, he got his attention first because of his publications such as Delirious New York and Small, Medium, Large, Extra Large. They have changed the way young architects approach design. His latest projects include 2 branches of the Guggenheim Museum in Las Vegas, also a Prada flagship store here in New York. He's also recently co-written 2 books in conjunction with his Harvard University's, quote, Project on the City. They are a great leap forward about China and the Harvard Design School Guide to Shopping. More about those as we continue our conversation here with Rem Koolhaas. It's good to have him back at this table. Welcome back. Lots have happened to you since you were here before. I think it was the, when was it? Was the publication
I think it's in 95, 96.
Yeah, 95, 96. There has been a Pritzker Prize that came about in the year 2000. At the time, even though you had built some things, you were primarily known as a writer. Fair to say?
It's fair. I think maybe not as a writer, but as somebody who made projects. And many of the projects we made have not been built, but I think it's really the combination of projects and writing.
Are architects influential?
No, I would say no. I think architects kind of right now have a very curious status. They are important, but I don't think they have influence. And I think the reason is that, you know, for the past 20 years, we have been undergone the blessings of the market economy. And that has been, in many ways, a kind of very euphoric condition. But, and it has made architects very important in terms of people who can produce identities and people who can produce masterworks and people who can produce things that the market economy needs. But I think the market economy has also kind of eroded slowly but surely the kind of really important things architects could do, like tell a person how a city would work or organize the way in which a railway system would work, or basically, so I think that we were important, but I think through the market economy, simply because the public sphere has shrunken, our importance has also shrunken with it.
Can that circumstance change?
I don't know whether it's necessarily a bad thing, because I think when we were influential, you know, we made many mistakes and we did many dangerous and many stupid things. And on one hand, on the other hand, I think the market economy, you know, as it is currently operating, will probably also eventually change, because I don't think it will be a permanent situation.
Leading to what?
I don't know what it's leading to, but I think that basically, you know, what we have been working on most in the past 5 years is to imagine how our architecture could recapture initiative, not so much influence, but more initiative. One of the reasons why I think I fundamentally doubt that architects have influence is that, for instance, it takes 4 years for an architect to do the least building. I mean, 4 years from beginning to end. And as you know, there are kind of very few operations or enterprises or ambitions right now that have a consensus that lasts more than 4 years. Yeah. Either the politics change, the money changes, or the... So, to be operating in our current system, architecture is an unbelievably slow and implausible mechanism. Because our current system needs immediate responses, immediate reactions, immediate reflexes, and immediate analysis.
Okay, but let me stay with the question I asked, which is, if the market economy is no longer going to be the economic model, what is it going to be?
I think my instinct, and it's not more than an instinct, is that it is likely that there will be a kind of shift back to some kind of public body and public presence, and that the dominance of the market in terms of most decisions is going to shift slightly back to a situation where there's a kind of combination of public and private.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, a public-private kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, do you see that reflected in any particular place today?
Well, you
more Europe than the United States, more...
Not necessarily. You can see it even in America, where since September 11, there have been kind of a huge amount of kind of undoing of deregulation, and kind of where certain responsibilities that were simply abandoned have been kind of taken back by the state. And you see the same phenomenon, of course, in Europe as well.
You also see, and this has been said often, that in a circumstance, an emergency, in a tragedy, when there is the need for a stabilizing, unifying, rallying point, government was the best place for that to happen. And government is reflected in civil servants and policemen and firemen and a whole lot of other people, which brought back a kind of respect.
Yeah, well, I think that it's of course totally premature to believe that kind of September 11 kind of will change
Euphoria.
the course of American history, because. But nevertheless, I think it has been an important demonstration that certain things, let's say, could not be settled by the market.
Okay. So. You staying with September 11 for a second. You were somewhere getting off a plane in the Midwest or somewhere, weren't you?
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, I was in the air basically when it happened, and then kind of as soon as I landed in Chicago, it became clear, or actually it was the moment I think some of it happened, and so it became clear that something terrible was happening. And we had a meeting, and very disconcertingly the meeting took place, but it was of course a crazy situation. And after being marooned in Chicago for a day, I drove back to New York, not knowing it was 15 hours. And I arrived, I don't know what day it was, I guess the 13th at 3 o'clock in the morning. And came from New Jersey, and you know there's a bridge, and there was nothing sticking over the bridge anymore except a huge plume, and it was thunder and lightning, so the plume would kind of be illuminated or not.
It is said, I think, that you were redesigning the L.A. County Museum of Art or something. What was it?
Yeah, LACMA, L.A. County.
Yeah. And that you, because of September 11th, you reapproached that and put a...
Basically, we were we took part in a competition for LACMA in Los Angeles, a very great museum, because it's one of the few encyclopedic museums on the West Coast. In fact, the only one. So it has collections, all kinds of collections, Eastern, European, American. So it's going to be. And the date of presentation was the 12th, so that was cancelled, and then we had 2 more months before we could present again. And in those 2 months, I had an intuition on the one hand that we should modify our project, because not only because we had more time, but some kind of instinct that America was changing and that we had a different opportunity. So we made an important part of it, the roof, into something more beautiful and more embracing than it was before.
Softer.
Yeah, softer. In the beginning I thought our project was tough, and it's still tough, but we added this further element, and it was basically a gesture to a new America.
And is that a singular exception, you think, or is that something that has taken hold in your own mind?
Well, what is interesting is that we won that competition because the way the brief was organized and what the program kind of suggested is that we should make one building that connected 2 groups of other buildings. And we tried to do that because, if you're an architect, you want to win competitions, and usually you win competitions if you do what people want. But in this case, we really couldn't convince ourselves it was the right thing to do. So what we did, and we were kind of really daunted by the enormity, was to propose to destroy most of the existing building and to
redesign it.
Start entirely from scratch, to start with a new building. And so the irony is that I think the effect of September 11 were twofold. On the one hand, we changed the building, but I think on the other hand, the committee that we had to present to were also in a different mood and were able and inclined to pose more serious questions. So, like, is it worth doing a new building, or does it have advantages to do a new building? And perhaps more than anything else, how radical is it worth being after September 11th? I think it was a radicalism that was stimulated by the events.
Take a look at this, because you have used a word that generally is not associated with you a lot, which is beauty. I mean,
I know that's a major tragedy. Yeah.
what?
I wish it were. Huh?
You wish beauty was more associated with you. But words like brutal and challenge and have been. Roll tape. This is a conversation I did with Richard Serra, the noted sculptor. Here it is.
Where's beauty? Beauty is kind of like a notion that's very, very hard for me to understand, in that it seems to be something that people lay over any given historical period, and the criteria always seems to be behind the times. I think, for the most part, artists don't get involved with beauty. They get involved with the language of art, they get involved with trying to extend the language of art, and if beauty happens, it's a residue of their involvement in the particularities of what they're trying to accomplish in terms of communicating something to someone else. The public may have some notion that artists are up to making beautiful things, but if you talk to artists seriously, that's not what they're up to.
Here's what's interesting about that. You have said almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Beauty is not the goal, but if it's a byproduct, okay.
I could modify it slightly and say that, of course, we work for beauty, and of course we try to do beautiful things, and of course we think everything we do in some way is extremely beautiful. But I think we simply don't have the words to really talk about it. And I think that is, that is also...
The language of beauty is not there.
The language of beauty is not there, perhaps to me personally, perhaps because of my background, perhaps because of the kind of overwhelming pressure of other interests. I've never kind of really... partly also because I thought it was kind of much more evident than it turned out to be. But I've never felt the need to kind of really talk about beauty and talk about why things we do are beautiful. It's just an inhibition, I think, or a kind of handicap. But I think that, every architect's career is also a series of technical decisions and strategies. And of course, if you, and perhaps that is also kind of part of the market economy, basically each of us has to has to perform in a certain way, and what is interesting is that the certain way you can perform is partly dictated by the public and partly dictated by your own kind of interest. So it's a kind of continuous struggle or dialectic between what you can do, what you actually do, and what you're assumed to do.
Okay. Let me stay with that idea, because and I don't know whether this can be said to be an overall modus operandi of you or not. Seattle Public Library. They want you to design a library. So you take it on your own to understand the function of a library, A, and B, you go, and 10 of your colleagues, you go to, you and others of your colleagues, go to a lot of public libraries, a lot of libraries, and you try to check out a book. In your case, one of your own books, small, medium, large, extra large, right? And you want to see what that does, because you're trying to understand what? Answer that.
Yeah, I think that because maybe it's important to know and kind of to introduce this kind of thing of being a writer or an architect. I'm not. I wasn't first an architect, so I don't have a kind of compulsive necessity to produce architecture, and I need to convince myself also. I mean, and that's perhaps the kind of real difficulty. I need to convince myself of the usefulness of kind of certain constructions, and so for that reason, it is incredibly important to get a sense of what the program and what the kind of specific purpose of something is. Also because in the past 10 years, our culture in almost every sense has completely transformed itself. An airport is no longer an airport, a library is no longer a library, shopping mall is no longer a mall. So for that reason, I think that we are continuously involved in kind of redefining things. And in that redefinition, it is very important that you can experience something at its most, let's say, intellectual, but also at its most basic level.
All right, well, so take me to Seattle then. What are you about there? Because you also want to make sure that you get at this idea of function before they being the person who's going to employ you. I don't want to say patron, but perhaps it's patron.
In that case, it was a librarian and a library board.
Yeah.
It is a municipal library, so that was an
So
important.
you wanted to get at some idea of what might be possible before they had settled on.
Exactly, and what was very important, it was not only 10 colleagues, it was the board, the librarian, and ourselves. So it was also kind of way in which during this kind of whole journey we could kind of sense each other's sensibilities, each other's allergies, and each other's ambitions. And so it was very important to have the dialogue and to kind of establish a relationship really before you start introducing architecture. Because once you introduce architecture, it's very soon and practically immediately becomes about being good or bad or correct or wrong or ugly or beautiful. So it was kind of, first we had a relationship as normal people, and then we had a professional relationship as board and architect.
Relationship as normal people meaning we just were, what, friends? We were...
Well, we had a dialogue, we had a conversation. Yeah. The other thing in Seattle that made it particularly important was that Seattle is, of course, not a city like all other cities. It's a city on the West Coast, which implies already a kind of sensibility. But then it was the city of Microsoft and the city of an incredible explosion of ingenuity and intelligence and an incredible technological know-how, which was at that point actually transforming not only the world, but also apparently threatening the kind of information system that the book represents. In other words, you could kind of sense that Seattle wanted to do a library at the moment that Seattle culture was kind of working on the definitive suspension of the necessity for a library. And so it was kind of really a negotiation also, with some, let's say, players in the kind of Seattle area to try to find a legitimacy for the library in spite of this other technology, and if possible to redefine the legitimacy with the support of the new technologies.
Take me to two other projects. One is the Guggenheim in Las Vegas. Just what was in your mind when you engaged? What was it about for you?
Basically, what interested me in the Guggenheim was Tom Cranz and the campaign that Tom Cranz has sustained in terms of modernizing the concept of the museum. Tom Cranz was the first one who thought of the idea of having a museum that could have one kind of headquarters seat, but that could also have outposts.
Almost satellites.
Satellites.
And exhibitions could go from one place to the other around the world.
And he was incredibly successful with doing that with Frank Gehry and Bilbao. And basically, Las Vegas seemed the second most plausible opportunity.
Why?
Well, basically, why? I think there was an opportunity in terms of a client who was interested in launching it. But I think even more, and that is where this kind of operation actually intersects with Harvard Guide to Shopping, in the sense that in that context I had kind of really studied Las Vegas and compared to Las Vegas how it had evolved since '72, the time that Bob Venturi looked at it, and discovered that in the meantime it really had become an incredibly urban metropolitan area with a huge population, huge facilities.
Fastest growing city in America.
Fastest growing city in America, and also a truly diverse kind of population. It was not only the kind of caricature of casinos, but also kind of much more diversity, and in themselves the casinos had also diversified from kind of purely gambling to being family oriented.
Right.
So it was
huge entertainment for the family.
And it was really challenging for me to see whether a kind of serious architect could intervene in that situation without losing credit or without being condescending, basically. And so what we did there was not only one element for the Guggenheim, a big exhibition hall, but we also, and that was a second part of why I was attracted to the operation, a small building for the Hermitage Museum, where the Hermitage Museum would lend some of its most beautiful works exhibited in Las Vegas, and earn money that would be applied to renovating some of the Hermitage in Petersburg.
Right. Let's
so
also
it was
make
a kind of circulation that was fascinating.
Let's make the point also that it was the building was going to be part of a casino.
It was embedded in a casino.
Embedded in a casino.
Embedded in a casino, and but you could also say that the logical outcome, if you extrapolate current situation and current trends and the way architecture is evolving, it's maybe slightly too strong to say that ultimately everything will be embedded in a casino. But I think you see a kind of more and more overwhelming association between apparently separate entities that are all kind of joined or at various places and that form a kind of continuous programmatic continuum, I think.
Let me then go to Prada. All right. Tell me about that. You've already completed the first one to lots of attention.
Yeah.
How did you approach that, and what was it that was interesting to you about designing a store?
It was really Prada came to us. Prada is led by a couple, Patrizio Bertelli and Miuccia Prada, and they came one day almost unannounced to our office and sat down.
This is in Rotterdam, or where is it?
Yeah, in Rotterdam, in kind of highly unglamorous kind of place. And its lack of glamour is actually its kind of incredible attraction. But basically, they sat down and said, we have a series of kind of wonderful sites and properties. We want to do something with them, but we don't want to repeat ourselves. And so we want to see whether you are able to change the concept of our shopping.
Okay, let me just stay with you for a second. Was there interest in creating a place that would be so attractive in itself that people would want to come there, and once they were there, they might buy something? Or did they want to make some other kind of statement that they were associated with?
I think at that point it was just to reinvent, they wanted to reinvent shopping. And I told them frankly that by coincidence, because I was in the middle of doing the book, I knew a lot about shopping, but I was not convinced myself that we could do it. And so I asked a kind of grace period of 3 months where I would investigate what they could do and kind of propose to them what they could do. And if they were convinced, but equally importantly, if we were convinced, we would do it. And so then we saw certain possibilities, and perhaps the critical difference with other kind of shopping is that, and that was also a term that came from Bertelli, they wanted shopping that would not be the same all the time, but that was variable, that could change, and that had a kind of, not a single stable identity, but that could change quickly over time.
They were heightening the experience of shopping.
Heightening the experience, but also enriching the experience of shopping, and at some points even kind of completely overwhelming the experience of shopping. So because that was, when we looked, for instance, at Soho, which was where the first store had to go, we saw that kind of Soho from industrial kind of area to a cultural area to commercial area, that was kind of like had happened in almost within 20, 30 years, and that the whole of Soho is now kind of patchwork of commercialism, and that one of the interesting things that they were willing to entertain was that you could introduce in that an element that was sometimes shopping, but not always shopping. That could sometimes be public, and that could sometimes be a totally different thing than purely commercial. And so our interest in the larger sense was that since the market economy, the city has become more and more dominated by private initiative. And so it became very interesting to conceptualize how the public could return inside the private. So it was an operation that also had a kind of political dimension, and that political dimension was an important part, I think, to Bertelli and Prada.
So what do you like about it now that you've completed it to generally enthusiasm?
Well, I like the way. Well, first of all, I should say maybe shamelessly that I think it is beautiful. I think also it is different. I like the way in which information in terms of a series of new technologies is used for both emphasizing the efficiency of the store, but also injecting completely parallel and sometimes opposite worlds in it, so that it's not only kind of focused on merchandise or focused on selling, but you also have a kind of sense of a larger world. And I'm very looking forward to the effect that the first performances will have on the store.
Okay, now you're going to do another one for them, at least one more, I know.
Yeah, we were working on one in Los Angeles,
yes.
And there will be one in San Francisco as well. And my Swiss colleagues are doing one in Tokyo.
And they'll all be dramatically different? They won't be the same?
They will all be dramatically different because that was in a way what they wanted.
Exactly. All right. Now, so let me come to shopping because I didn't want to come to cities, but shopping first. Here is what. Just explain to me. You teach at the Harvard School of Design, and you have these graduate students there. You said to me something fascinating because it was relating an experience I have with 4 students who are working with this program. And you said the students are smarter than the teachers these days. Or you said it better than that.
Yes, maybe not smarter, but
no, you said it better. What did you say?
I think basically when I first came to Harvard or to any school, the kind of model was that a teacher taught people, what to design, what to do, and you would be there. And for instance, an example was to rehabilitate a kind of abandoned harbor pier in Boston Harbor.
Yeah.
And basically, you looked at the student body, and the student body, was only partly American. It was, in the meantime, incredibly diverse, incredible injection of Asian, European, and even African presence, lots of South American too. And so you realize that the relevance of abandoned harbor piers is very limited, and that there are kind of certain areas of the world where piers are not abandoned, and other areas where there are no harbors, and areas where there, etc., etc. So it made me aware that this kind of model of teaching from the center to the periphery in a way doesn't necessarily work anymore, and that if you could mobilize the intelligence of those kind of experiences, you could suddenly perform an entirely different work, and which was to create further intelligence about things we don't know anything about. So I think that the radical, and sorry to use the word against, the radical thing about the project, I think, is that it's not based on knowledge, and presumably my knowledge, and then to be distributed or diluted with the students, but it starts with ignorance, and absolute ignorance, and we only look at things we're ignorant about. And then we try to create, in the space of a year, knowledge about that kind of particular thing.
Okay, so let me just take 3 things you're looking at. Just 3, and many more. I'm going to go to shopping, okay? Here's what you said. The best metaphor of shopping is that of a dying animal, a dying elephant that in its death struggle becomes completely wild and uncontrollable.
Well,
the most well-meaning brains in our profession have contributed to this final terminal condition.
I'm shocked at my own kind of rhetoric, but
shocked at your own rhetoric.
Yes. Let me kind of rephrase it slightly. one thing that was interesting in how we started was that shopping had not been a kind of formal subject in kind of any of the Ivy League schools for the past 5 years. So there was, to begin with, a kind of paradoxical situation that the building program that is the most common and that in terms of kind of square footage is by far the dominant one in the worldwide,
right.
Was not officially studied kind of in Ivy League circumstances. And I think what it really shows is that the world of that kind of crass commercialism, except certain rare exceptions, was basically below the radar of architecture, or to put it slightly less generously, kind of simply beyond the pale. Architecture did not want to deal with it. So that is why we felt we had to kind of record shopping, try to understand shopping, and kind of study what the consequences of these enormous quantity of shopping were, not only on our life, but also on the city. And what you see is that shopping started, of course, in a kind of very simple way. It started presumably with a market, then there were stores, then there were shopping streets, then there were arcades, then there were department stores. But in each of those, shopping in itself was pure. But what we have seen in the past 20 years is that shopping has begun to connect itself to almost every activity known to man. Museums have shopping and are depending on shopping. Churches have shopping, are dependent on shopping. Universities have shopping and are dependent on shopping and marketing. And perhaps more fundamentally, airports that used to be kind of very strict machineries to get you from A to B have become kind of labyrinth of shopping. So that basically all activities known to men are now deeply infiltrated and dependent on shopping. On the other hand, shopping, to survive in its current quantity, depends on those activities, so, and on those hybrids. So we have a kind of incredibly hybrid condition, I think ultimately stimulated by the market economy, where in the end, the shopping has become our most kind of reliable and if not our only kind of emblem of what is urban, or only symbol of what is urban. And I think at that point a kind of really enormous change has taken place, where the city used to be public and free. The city is now private and you have to pay for it. And I think that new condition is really the subject of the book.
There is nothing to me more challenging than how, and this has to do with globalization, it has to do with what you write, it has to do with some of your own interest. Nothing more challenging than what happens to cities and how we look at cities. And in this hour, I don't have time to do that. So what I would like to do is say, take note of shopping and take note of Harvard's, this shopping, which is the Black Book, and the Red Book, which is the Great Leap Forward, and invite you to come back and let's take a look at cities and how you see them and where they're going, and what their future is.
Okay, I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Rem Koolhaas, these two books are just being published. He's gotten lots of attention for Prada. He won a Pulitzer Prize, the highest thing that the world of architecture can bestow on an architect. And I look forward to part 2 of our conversation when we talk about the future of cities. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.